still remember the way the bell above the antique shop door jingled as I stepped inside. It was a soft, delicate sound, but it felt out of place in the heavy silence of that dimly lit room. The air was thick with the smell of aged wood, mothballs, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like dried blood. Rows of mismatched furniture, faded paintings, and porcelain dolls stared back at me with their lifeless eyes. But there was one thing in particular that had pulled me here, a glass case sitting in the far corner of the room, almost hidden beneath shadows cast by a flickering light bulb overhead. Inside that case was her, Annabelle. You've heard the name before, haven't you? Maybe in movies, stories whispered at sleepovers, or viral videos claiming to know her truth. But let me tell you something. Most of those stories, they're just fragments of what really happened. Polished up, twisted or stripped down until they're nothing but shadows of the truth. I didn't come here because I was a thrill seeker or a paranormal investigator. I came because I had no other choice. I'd seen things I still can't fully explain, things that follow me into my dreams and wake me up drenched in sweat. People think they know Annabelle's story, but I've seen something they haven't, something that still haunts me to this day. When I first laid eyes on her, it felt like she was staring back at me even though her glass eyes couldn't possibly move. The dim light made the painted smile on her face look wrong, stretched a little too wide. A note was taped to the glass in fading handwriting. Do not open under any circumstances. I should have turned around and left right then, but I didn't. And that's why I'm here now, telling you this story. Because what I discovered about Annabelle, the truth about her origin, it's not something you'll find in any movie or ghost story. It's darker, more twisted, and it cost people their lives. But before we go deeper into this disturbing tale, make sure you subscribe for more stories that keep you awake at night. Trust me, you're going to want to hear what happens next. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. It all started with an email, a simple formal request. We're hosting an estate sale at the Hawthorne Manor this weekend. Your photography services have been recommended. Compensation will be generous. Please, RSVP. At the time, freelance gigs like this weren't unusual for me. I'd spent years documenting estate sales and antique collections for auction houses, snapping photos of dusty paintings, cracked porcelain dolls, and jewelry boxes with secrets hidden beneath velvet linings. But Hawthorne Manor, I'd never heard of it. A quick search turned up nothing. No photos, no history, just an address pinned in the middle of nowhere. Still, curiosity and the promise of generous compensation got the better of me. I arrived at the manor on an overcast morning. The building loomed over me like something ripped straight from a Gothic novel. Blackened stone walls, tall windows with cracked glass, and ivy crawling across every surface like nature itself was trying to strangle the place. A man greeted me at the door, tall, thin, and dressed in a suit that looked as though it hadn't been updated since the early 1900s. His voice was smooth but cold. "You're here for the photographs, yes? Follow me. And be careful what you focus your lens on." The inside of the manor was worse. Dust blanketed every surface, and the heavy scent of mildew clung to the air. Rooms were filled with treasures from another time. Hand-carved furniture, velvet drapes faded to a dull grey, glass display cases filled with porcelain figurines and tarnished silverware. But then, in a small side room tucked away behind heavy curtains, I saw it, a glass case polished despite the dust covering everything else in the room. The case stood on an ornate wooden pedestal, its surface etched with symbols I didn't recognize, runes or protective charms, perhaps. Inside sat a doll. It wasn't the version of Annabelle you've seen in movies, a Hollywood monstrosity designed to terrify on sight. No, this doll was far more unassuming. It wore a simple white dress stained yellow with age, its face painted with wide, innocent eyes and small rosy lips. But the longer I looked at it, the more wrong it felt. The collector, who had been watching me the entire time, cleared his throat. Do not photograph this doll. Do not touch the case, and do not, under any circumstances, open it. I nodded, feeling a chill creep up my spine despite the stale warmth of the room. This doll is special. It doesn't belong here. It doesn't belong anywhere. Please focus on the other artifacts instead. I tried to follow his instructions. Truly, I did. But every time I passed that room, every time I caught a glimpse of that glass case in my peripheral vision, I felt pulled toward it. It was as if the doll was calling me, not audibly, but in a way I couldn't ignore. Hours passed, and I continued photographing the rest of the estate. Chandeliers coated in cobwebs, gilded mirrors reflecting shadows that didn't seem to match my movements, and dusty books with titles that had long faded away. But eventually, I found myself back in front of that glass case. The collector had left me alone to finish my work. The sun was setting, and the light filtering through the cracked windows bathed the doll in an eerie golden glow. One photo, I told myself. Just one. No one will know. I raised my camera, focused the lens on the doll's glassy eyes, and snap. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room. The flash illuminated the case for just a split second, but in that brief moment, I swear, I saw something. A reflection in the glass, something behind the doll, a shadow tall and twisted, looming just out of focus. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my camera. That's when I heard it. A whisper, not in my ears but somewhere inside my head. A faint, childlike voice humming a tune I didn't recognize. I turned around, scanning the room. Empty. The door behind me was still closed. I looked back at the doll, and this time I noticed something new. The glass case was no longer spotless. There, on the inside of the glass, were fingerprints, small, smudged fingerprints pressed against the surface, as though tiny hands had been reaching out, trying to escape. I wanted to leave. Every instinct told me to grab my things and get out of that house. But as I turned to go, something else caught my eye. The reflection in one of the glass display cases nearby. There was something standing in the doorway. Just out of focus, its silhouette distorted by the warped glass. I spun around. No one was there, but the whispering grew louder. Why did you take her picture? I couldn't tell if the voice was coming from the doll, from the air, or from somewhere deep inside my mind. The door to the room creaked open behind me, and the collector stepped inside. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a tight line. You took a photo, didn't you? I couldn't speak. I couldn't even nod. He sighed, a long, defeated breath, and ran a hand down his face. You need to leave. Now. And I did. I packed up my gear, barely able to keep my hands from shaking, and rushed out of Hawthorne Manor without looking back. But even as I drove away, the faint humming of that childlike voice stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind, like an echo that refused to fade. What I didn't know then was that my connection to Annabelle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. If you found yourself alone in a room with that doll, would you have taken the picture or walked away forever? I couldn't stop thinking about that doll, the way it stared through the glass, the faint smudge of tiny fingerprints, and most of all, that whisper. Soft, childlike, and impossibly distant, yet somehow inside my head. After leaving Hawthorne Manor, I promised myself I'd forget about it. I'd finish editing the photos, collect my payment, and move on to the next gig. But the problem with certain kinds of fear is that they don't let go of you. They sink into your bones, settle in the pit of your stomach, and linger behind closed eyelids when you try to sleep. A week later, I received a package, unmarked, no return address. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. The edges were worn, the pages yellowed with age, and the cover smelled faintly of mildew and something sour. On the first page, written in a shaky child's handwriting, was a name, Eliza Hawthorne. My hands shook as I turned the page. March 3rd, 1937. Mother gave me a doll today. She says her name is Annabelle, and she'll keep me company while I'm getting better. I like her. Her eyes are kind. The entries started innocently enough. Eliza was bedridden after a carriage accident. Her mother had bought Annabelle from a traveling merchant, hoping it would cheer her daughter up. For the first few pages, it was just a child's scribbled thoughts. How she liked Annabelle's dress, how she whispered secrets to her at night, and how she felt less lonely with her new friend. But then the entries began to change. April 14th, 1937. Annabelle doesn't like Nurse Margaret. She says Margaret is mean and doesn't really care about me. Annabelle told me a secret about her, something bad. And you know what? Margaret fell down the stairs today. Mother says it was an accident, but Annabelle says it wasn't. April 21st, 1937. The cat is dead. Annabelle said it was better this way. The cat was spying on us, watching us through the window. She said it's safer now. May 5th, 1937. Mother is sick. She doesn't come to my room anymore. Annabelle says it's because she doesn't trust her. Annabelle says Mother wants to take her away from me, but I won't let her. Annabelle says I don't have to. My breathing became shallow as I turned the pages. The handwriting grew more frantic, jagged, as if Eliza had been clutching the pencil too tightly. Smears of ink, no, smears of something darker, stained some of the pages. The final entries were almost illegible, but one sentence repeated again and again, scrawled in increasingly chaotic handwriting. She won't let me go. She won't let me go. She won't let me go. I slammed the journal shut, my pulse roaring in my ears. What the hell had I just read? I could almost see her, a frail little girl clutching that doll with trembling hands, wide eyes brimming with fear as shadows danced across her bedroom walls. I could almost hear her tiny voice whispering desperately into the dark. The journal slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. But something else caught my attention as it landed, a loose photograph tucked between the pages. It was an old black and white picture, a young girl, Eliza, I assumed, sitting on the edge of a bed. She was holding Annabelle in her lap, her tiny arms wrapped tightly around the doll. But it wasn't Eliza that froze the blood in my veins. It was Annabelle. In the photo, her head was tilted slightly to one side, her painted smile just a little too wide. But what stood out most were her eyes. They weren't painted. They weren't glass. They looked real. My stomach churned as I shoved the journal and the photograph back into the box. I wanted to throw it away, burn it, bury it somewhere it could never be found. But instead, I sat there, staring at the box as if it might start whispering to me. Why had someone sent this to me? Who knew about my encounter at Hawthorne Manor? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just an elaborate prank. Maybe someone wanted to scare me, knowing I had been to the manor. But deep down, I knew better. There was something about Annabelle, something ancient, something hungry. I decided to dig deeper. I started researching the Hawthorne family, poring over public records and visiting archives in dusty libraries. The deeper I went, the clearer the picture became. Eliza had died shortly after the final journal entry. Her mother was found in her room, delirious and feverish, clutching Annabelle to her chest. She was reportedly muttering the same words over and over. She won't let me go. She won't let me go. After both of their deaths, the doll was locked away, passed through private collectors, and eventually sealed inside that glass case in Hawthorne Manor. Each new owner reported similar phenomena: whispers, shadows, accidents that couldn't be explained. The final recorded owner, the collector I had met, had tried to contain her. But now I had the journal. and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that somehow Annabelle had found a way to follow me. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard it again, a faint whisper. "Why did you read her story?" The voice was soft, childlike, and impossibly far away, but it was in my room. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dark with the journal on my desk and the photograph face down beside it. I couldn't stop thinking about Eliza, about her tiny hands clutching that doll, about the shadows in her room and the final words scrawled over and over in her trembling handwriting. "She won't let me go." And now, I wondered, would she ever let me go? If you found a journal like this, would you keep reading? Or would you run and never look back? After reading Eliza's journal and seeing that cursed photograph, something inside me shifted. It felt like I'd opened a door, one that was never supposed to be unlocked. I thought I could shake it off. I thought I could close the book, shove it into a drawer, and move on with my life. But you can't unsee something like that. You can't unhear those whispers. The first night was subtle, almost dismissible. I was editing the photos I'd taken at Hawthorne Manor, squinting at my laptop screen as I tried to adjust the lighting on a particularly grainy shot of Annabelle's case. My apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. And then, a soft tap-tap-tap came from somewhere behind me. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest as I turned to look over my shoulder. Nothing. I convinced myself it was just the old pipes in the building, or maybe something outside. But when I turned back to my screen, the image of Annabelle had changed. At first I thought I was imagining it, but no, the angle was the same, the lighting identical, but Annabelle's head had tilted ever so slightly to the left. I slammed my laptop shut. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard faint footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. Slow, deliberate, tap, tap, tap. They stopped just outside my door. I held my breath, clutching the blanket to my chest, my ears straining to hear anything else. And then, a whisper. "Are you awake?" The voice was faint, childlike, and right outside my door. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, things escalated. Objects moved on their own. My keys disappeared from the counter only to reappear in the fridge. Lights flickered without reason. The faint scent of mildew began to cling to the air, no matter how many candles I lit. But it was the glass case that nearly drove me mad. I had kept Eliza's journal and the photograph locked in a drawer, but every time I passed by my desk, I could hear the glass case rattling in my mind. And then came the shadows. At first, they were just flickers in my peripheral vision, shapes darting across the walls when nothing should have been moving. But one night, I saw something more. I was brushing my teeth, leaning over the sink, when I glanced up at the bathroom mirror. Behind me, reflected in the dim light, stood a figure. Small, still, a little girl. She was blurry, just out of focus, but I could make out enough. Her hair hung limp around her face, her dress old and stained, and in her arms, she was holding Annabelle. I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. The toothpaste dripped from my mouth as I stared into the empty space where she'd been. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go back, to return to Hawthorne Manor. I thought maybe, if I put the journal and photograph back where I found them, if I left everything behind, whatever had followed me would stop. It was night by the time I arrived at the manor. The overcast sky swallowed the moon, leaving the place shrouded in suffocating darkness. My flashlight barely cut through the gloom as I made my way up the broken stone steps. The door creaked open as if it had been expecting me. The air inside was colder than I remembered. Each breath came out in faint clouds as I walked down the narrow hallway, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. The glass case was still there, exactly where I'd left it. Annabelle stared back at me from behind the glass, her painted smile frozen in place. I pulled the journal and photograph from my bag and carefully set them down in front of the case. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I shouldn't have taken these. Please, just let me go." For a moment, nothing happened. The air felt impossibly still, and then, crack. The glass case splintered, not shattered, but cracked, thin spiderweb fractures crawling across the surface. Annabelle's head tilted slightly to one side, and her painted eyes seemed to follow me. From somewhere deep in the house, I heard a door slam shut. I turned and ran, but the manor wasn't going to let me go that easily. Every hallway felt longer, every turn unfamiliar. The doors I'd passed through earlier were now locked, their knobs refusing to turn. My flashlight flickered and died. I was plunged into darkness. Somewhere behind me, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps. Tap, tap, tap. And then, closer this time, "You shouldn't have come back." The voice was soft, childlike, but filled with an unnatural weight. I pressed myself against the nearest door, my nails scraping against the wood as I tried desperately to open it. "Please," I whispered, "please just let me go." But the voice came again, this time right next to my ear. "She won't let you go." I screamed. The door behind me suddenly gave way, and I stumbled into what felt like a small storage room. I slammed the door shut and slid to the floor, clutching my knees to my chest as I tried to slow my breathing. It was quiet in the room. Too quiet. And then I heard it. A faint humming. A child's lullaby. In the beam of faint moonlight filtering through a cracked window, I saw something in the corner of the room. A chair. And sitting on that chair was Annabelle. Not in a glass case, not behind protective symbols. Just sitting there, her head tilted, her smile wide and unblinking. The humming grew louder. My head started to pound. "She won't let you go. She won't let you go." I backed up until I hit the door again, my body trembling violently. But Annabelle didn't move. She didn't need to, because the shadows around her did. They began to stretch, to move across the floor like ink spreading in water. I don't remember how I got out. I don't remember how I escaped that room, or how I ended up back in my car, my hands white-knuckling the steering wheel as I sped away from the manor. All I know is that when I finally got home, I locked every door and window and collapsed on the floor of my living room, gasping for air. But even now, as I sit here telling you this story, I know it's not over. Because every night, just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear it. A faint whisper in the dark. She won't let you go. If you were trapped in that manor with Annabelle, would you have tried to escape, or would you have faced her head-on? I don't know why I went back. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was some twisted sense of responsibility. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew that running wasn't going to save me. Hawthorne Manor stood waiting, draped in shadows, as though it had been holding its breath since I left. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pushed through the heavy doors and stepped inside. The air was colder now, and the faint scent of mildew was stronger, mixed with something else, something rancid, like spoiled meat. My flashlight flickered weakly as I made my way back to that room, back to her, Annabelle. She was still there, sitting in her cracked glass case. The fractures had grown, spreading like jagged spider webs across the surface. Her painted smile seemed sharper now, her wide eyes glistening as though she knew I had returned. "This ends tonight," I whispered. My voice trembled, but my grip on the crowbar I'd brought was firm. I raised it above my head and brought it down with every ounce of strength I had. Crash! The glass shattered, exploding outward in a cascade of shards. The sound echoed through the manor like a gunshot, followed by a deep, guttural groan that seemed to come from the very walls. But as the dust settled, I realized something horrifying. Annabelle was gone. The pedestal was empty. The air around me felt thick, like it was pressing down on my chest. And then I heard it. A soft, choking sob. I turned, my flashlight sweeping across the room, until the beam landed on a corner cloaked in shadows. There she was, a little girl, frail, pale, with hollow eyes and tangled hair. Eliza. She was clutching Annabelle to her chest, rocking back and forth as tears streamed down her dirty cheeks. She said she'd keep me safe, Eliza whimpered. But she lied. She lied to me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. And then, from the shadows behind her, it appeared. A towering silhouette, impossibly thin and jagged, like a broken marionette made of darkness. Its limbs creaked as it moved, and its hollow face split into a mouth far too wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. The force that radiated from it was suffocating. Eliza clutched Annabelle tighter, her small body trembling violently. "It's her," she whispered. "She's the doorway." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Annabelle wasn't just possessed. She wasn't just a vessel for a spirit. She was a trap, a conduit, a prison designed to contain something ancient, something unspeakably evil. But now, with the glass shattered, with the runes destroyed, that thing was free. The entity lunged forward, its elongated fingers stretching toward Eliza. She screamed, a sound so raw and filled with terror that it pierced straight through me. The room erupted in chaos. The walls groaned, cracks spidered across the ceiling, and a wind unlike anything I'd ever felt howled through the manor. Objects were thrown across the room, glass shattered, and the chandelier overhead swung wildly, casting fractured light over the chaos. "You have to stop it," Eliza shrieked. "Put her back! Put her back!" But Annabelle was gone. She was gone. The shadow creature turned its hollow gaze toward me, its mouth stretched into a grin that felt wrong, like it was stitched across its face by someone who had never seen a real smile. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran, but the manor wasn't letting me go without a fight. The hallway twisted and stretched, doors slammed shut in front of me, and the floor groaned beneath my feet like it was seconds away from giving out. "You can't leave," a voice whispered in the dark. "You let it out." I stumbled into the grand foyer just as the walls began to buckle inward, the entire manor groaning and creaking as though it was alive. My flashlight flickered, then died completely, leaving me in complete darkness, save for the faint glow of moonlight seeping through cracked windows. And then I saw her. Annabelle. She was lying at the base of the grand staircase, limp, her painted eyes staring upward. I didn't think, I acted. I lunged forward, grabbing the doll by her brittle arm, and bolted toward the front door. It wouldn't open. The handles rattled uselessly in my grip. The wind roared through the foyer, and the shadow creature emerged again, crawling down the staircase, its limbs twisting unnaturally as it dragged itself toward me. "Put her back!" Eliza's voice screamed in my head, and I knew what I had to do. There was an old display cabinet nearby, covered in dust and broken glass. I shoved Annabelle inside, slamming the door shut and clawing at the nearby floorboards, carving crude symbols with a jagged shard of glass. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know if it would work. But as I finished the final rune, the air shifted. The creature froze mid-step, its hollow eyes locked on Annabelle inside the cabinet. A sound erupted from it, a piercing wail that shook the walls and rattled my bones. The creature's form began to disintegrate, breaking apart into wisps of smoke that were pulled, screaming, back into the doll. And then, silence. The wind stopped. The walls went still. I could hear my own ragged breathing, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a clock ticking. I stumbled back, staring at the cabinet where Annabelle now sat, her painted eyes frozen once more. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I turned and ran. This time, the door opened without resistance. I stumbled outside into the cold night air, collapsing onto the overgrown lawn as the manor behind me stood still and lifeless. The night sky above was clear, the stars distant and cold. I didn't go back. I didn't tell anyone what happened. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it again. A faint whisper. She won't let you go. I don't know if the runes I carved were enough. I don't know if Annabelle is truly contained or if she's just waiting. But if you ever find yourself in an antique shop staring at a dusty glass case with a doll locked inside, walk away. Don't take a picture. Don't get too close. And for God's sake, don't break the glass. Subtle audience interaction. If you were in my shoes, would you have broken the glass or left the doll behind forever? It's been months since that night at Hawthorne Manor, but it still feels fresh, like an open wound that refuses to heal. I've replayed every moment in my mind, every decision, every sound, every shadow, and no matter how many times I go over it, one thing remains painfully clear. I was lucky to make it out alive. The next morning, I saw a brief news report, a passing mention of a structural collapse at an abandoned estate. No details, no investigation, just another forgotten place swallowed by time. But here's the thing. When the authorities went to inspect the wreckage, they didn't find her. They didn't find Annabelle. I don't know what that means. Did she survive the collapse? Did someone else find her? Did something find her? Sometimes I try to convince myself it's over, that whatever evil was trapped in that doll is gone, buried beneath the rubble of that cursed house. But late at night, when the world is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I hear it again. That faint, childlike whisper. Why did you let me out? It's always just a whisper, soft enough that I can almost convince myself I imagined it. Almost. Sleep doesn't come easily anymore. When it does, it's filled with dreams of Eliza, her hollow eyes staring at me from the shadows, her frail hands clutching that doll as the darkness closed in around her. I've tried to move on. I've tried to bury this story, to pretend it never happened. But the truth is, some stories refuse to stay buried. And if there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's this. Annabelle wasn't just an object. She wasn't just a haunted doll locked inside a glass case. She was a doorway, and doorways, they go both ways. That thought keeps me up at night. If Annabelle was just the beginning, if she was just one doorway among countless others, then what else is out there? What else is waiting, locked away in some forgotten attic, some dusty basement, some unmarked grave? How many doors have already been opened, and how many of us are walking through them without even realizing it? I'll probably regret sharing this story. Some doors are better left unopened, and some secrets are better left undiscovered. But you needed to hear it. You needed to know. So here's my advice. If you ever come across something that feels wrong, something that whispers when it shouldn't, something that watches you when you aren't looking, walk away, because some things aren't meant to be understood. Some things aren't meant to be touched. If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, some secrets are better left buried